For those of you who are here, thanks for coming out. It's great to see everybody. For those of you online, well, it's great to not see you, but thanks for joining us. I was talking with some friends in Ohio, and they're a little bit in the 19th century, and they said they don't have a computer even. They have nothing. So they go to their church and just stick it out. So praise God that we have the technology to make it available, and it's good. Merry Christmas, even it's a day late. Merry Christmas season. For those of you in the Jewish persuasion, Merry Messiahmas. Truth be told, that if you can celebrate this day, this week in this season, Christmas, you can celebrate Christmas every day. Because it's not a day, it's a life. It's a life that we can celebrate, that God, the hope of the world, came down to give us eternal life. Praise His name. So, I don't know if you have all of these TV stations, and any of you can relate with this. You can scan through and watch for something you can actually watch on TV, and you click through, 7,000 stations and movies, and there's nothing on. However, Shoshana and I, we found a movie, I think last week. It's called Greater. I would highly recommend this movie. It was just a very touching movie. Greater, it's the story of Brandon Bullsworth, who was a guy in a small town in Arkansas who basically was a nobody. And his dream was to play for the Arkansas Razorbacks. And long story short, after he devoted himself to do that, he got onto the team, and he made such an impact on the team that they went on to have a winning season. And not only did he play for the Razorbacks, but he was drafted by the Indianapolis Colts after he received a reward for one of the Great American Award of Sports, college award. You could tell I really am not big into college sports or anything, but he won this award. It was a big to-do. And 2 weeks before he was going to sign with the Colts, he was tragically killed in a car accident. Now, that's the story about him, but really the story I want to talk to you about a little bit is his older brother, Marty. Marty, after going through all of these tragedies in life and all of the tribulations, we see the movie kind of focusing on his attitude. And you can see him losing his faith. He's losing his desire to have any kind of faith at all, even so much so that he's even labored to be at the funeral. And he's just like, why? Why is it like that? Why does such a good person have such a tragedy? And so he was showing that he was throwing in the towel. And sometimes life is like that. Sometimes we want to throw in the towel. Sometimes, maybe you're in the place in your life is, I made it to Christmas. It's like, I couldn't believe it's finally here. Maybe you're saying, all I have to do is get to New Year's, and it'll start all over. Good things will come. Guess what? New Year isn't going to change it. Life is going to be what it is. Life is probably not going to get a whole lot better. Trials and tribulations are going to still come. I'm not saying this, as a doomsday kind of thing, but look around. There's opposition from government, from jobs, no jobs, from people, from society's own views. Sometimes the circumstances in life cause us to want to just throw the towel in on the faith. And that's not uncommon. In fact, Israel was going through a lot of stuff like that. We're going to look today in the book of Hebrews, chapter 12, how to run the race. And so I want to tell you a little bit about Hebrews, but the Jewish believers who were the recipients of this letter, they were at a point where they were getting ready to throw in the towel. You see, Hebrews is written to Jewish believers, and the Jewish people during the time when it was written somewhere around 65. It was written by a Jewish believer in Jesus, probably a second-generation believer from the disciples. He was very familiar with Torah and Jewish ways. And the Jewish people at that time, they were being persecuted by Rome. They were being mocked and humiliated. In fact, the language says it was like they were on stage being mocked like a clown. And the Jewish people just were being persecuted and afflicted, and they just were going through a very rough season. And the Jewish believers who were in the area, not only did they have to deal with the persecution from Rome, the humiliation from society, but they were also believers. And so they were being persecuted from Jewish people, the Jewish religious people, and they were just, it was coming from them at every angle. And they were saying, this is so hard. This living in this faith is so hard. Maybe we should just go back to traditional Judaism. And then what they were thinking is, we'll go back to traditional Judaism, and then when things settle down, we can revisit Jesus. Well, that's not the way it works, and the writer of Hebrews is trying to persuade them to not turn their back on Jesus. He wants to persuade them that faith in Jesus and the Messianic faith is better than everything in the Old Testament. It's better than the law, it's better than the commandments, it's better than Moses, it's better than angels, it's better than the priesthood. He is the fulfillment. He is not only better, but the best. And you can't undo what you've done. Now, he's not talking about if they turn their back, they're going to lose their position, but that they would lose their rewards. So I want to read for you from Hebrews chapter 10 to give you the setting of the situation for what this is in chapter 12. Chapter 12 actually is a continuation from chapter 10, which is why I want to go there. The Jewish believers just were, they had it. And, we might be sitting here today and thinking, living in this faith is hard. And sometimes I just want to throw it all away. But the author of Hebrews, which we don't know who it is, but we do know what he was about, he wants to help the Jewish believers hold fast to their faith. And so this is Hebrews chapter 10. I'm going to start in verse 35. And this is the message he's giving to them as he's going to encourage them to persevere in the faith. Verse 35, therefore do not throw away your confidence, which has great reward. And the word throw away here has to do with throw it away as if it has no value. Do not throw it away as if it has no value. It has great value. He goes on to say in verse 36 and following, for you have need of endurance. And the theme of endurance is what he's going to pick up on in chapter 12. So you have need of endurance so that when you have done the will of God, you may receive what was promised. Now again, this is about the rewards, not about the position. We can lose rewards, but we can never lose our position in the Lord. Verse 37, for yet in a very little while, he who is coming will come and will not delay. But my righteous one shall live by faith, and if he shrinks back, my soul has no pleasure in him. But we are not those who shrink back to destruction, but those who have faith to the preserving of the soul. So the writer of Hebrews is trying to encourage the Jewish believers. We are not those who shrink back. And then we get to chapter 11. If you're familiar with chapter 11, I call this the Hall of Faith. This is where we see the stories and the testimonies of the great people of the Old Testament. And the interesting thing about it is they didn't turn their back. They persevered through all of life's circumstances. And in the chapter, I want to read just a couple of verses, beginning in verse 32, and then a little bit further on, it says, and what more shall I say, for time will fail me if I tell you about Gideon, Barak, Samson. The writer was saying, if I tell you about everybody of faith, I don't have enough time. Me too. I don't have enough time to tell you about everybody of great faith. But know for sure that the Old Testament saints, they had faith. And they had faith that was interesting because they were looking forward to something and waiting for it. We have something and we look back. We can actually see the completion of it. But they were believing something beyond what they were able to see. And it goes on to say in verse 35, women received back their dead and by resurrection, and others were tortured, not accepting their release, so that they might obtain a better resurrection. And others were experienced mockings and scourgings, and yes, also chains and imprisonment. They were stoned, they were sawn in two. They were tempted, they were put to death with the sword. They went about in sheepskins and goatskins, and being destitute, afflicted, ill-treated. Well, the Old Testament saints went through it, and they were thrown in a pit of fire. They were fed to the lions, but they endured. It says they were sawn in two. Tradition believes that Isaiah was actually sawn in two. So the Old Testament saints pressed on and suffered the most horrific persecutions, and they persevered. And so we can also persevere. And so we have this testimony of what went before us. And then we get to chapter 12, and the question we have here is, how can we run the race? How can we run the race? We're all called to a race. I don't know if you knew it when you signed up to believe in Jesus, but you entered a race. A race is something where you prepare and you discipline yourself and you run. You don't just kind of sit in the sidelines and watch. You're an active participant in the race. And when you came to faith, you entered the race. And so there are three things in verses 1 to 3 that will help us successfully run this race. The first thing is to lay aside. The second thing is fix our eyes. And then the third thing is consider Jesus. So we're going to look at these three things. We're going to look at how we can run this race in a way that's pleasing to God and in a way that will ensure us victory when we press on. So the first thing we're going to... was I pressing the button that whole time? I guess I was. Okay, 12:1, let us lay aside. This is Hebrews 12, verse 1. Therefore, since we have so great a cloud of witnesses surrounding us, let us also lay aside every encumbrance and the sin which so easily entangles us, and let us run with endurance the race that is set before us. Just in this verse, by the way, there's a whole lot here. We're going to look at it a little bit. But the first thing I want to point out is, you see the word therefore? A lot of times when we see the word therefore in the Bible, we think it's really not an important word, but it's therefore for a very important reason. Therefore, in light of what I just told you, that's what he says. In light of what I just told you, pay attention, because I'm going to tell you something that's worthwhile. Therefore, since we have so great a cloud of witnesses, we have incentive to run this race. We have this cloud of witnesses in the Old Testament saints. They persevered. They will have gone through way more than we will ever go through in our lives. I'm sure none of us are going to be threatened to be sawn in two, or pierced with a sword, or even thrown into a lion's den, but they endured. We have a cloud of witnesses who testify that enduring in the faith is beneficial because God is pleased with our faithfulness. The cloud of witnesses, not only as the Old Testament saints give us incentive to run, but Jesus. Jesus is the perfect example to follow. He had perfect faith, and he endured suffering and shame and pain, and he endured being afflicted, and he endured persecution from family and from society, from religious leaders, from government. He was tried and found guilty, even though he had done no wrong. He was condemned to die a sinner's death. So when we look at what he went through, which we're going to look at a little bit more when we go to the third part and we consider Jesus, he is our incentive. He can motivate us. He did this. We can follow. And then it says, lay aside every encumbrance. This lay aside, and he uses a metaphor of running a race. And there's a lot of valuable, figures of speech and imagery that we can see here, running a race. So somebody running a race, I want you to try to envision, let's say you're in the Olympics and you do your warm-up and you go down out to the oval to run your race, and you come out in your sweatsuit, right? What do? You lay it aside. You take it off. You put it down so that you can run the race without anything distracting and encumbering you, without anything getting in your way, so that you can run most efficiently. And they wear these, skin-tight things, so even loose fabric won't catch air. And so nothing hinders you. Lay it aside. So God tells us to lay aside every encumbrance so that we can run the most efficient race. When I was in Bible school, I went to Elton, Louisiana, and I did ministry amongst an Native American tribe. And I was talking with a guy who was translating the Bible into this tribe's language. It had never been translated. And he was telling us the process of how they would come up with proper translations for words, particularly in Hebrews chapter 12, where it says, lay aside every encumbrance and the sin that so easily entangles us. So this is the process of how they came up with the translation for this language. So that what they did is they got one of the tribes people to run, and while he was running, he was carrying an anchor. And in fact, the word here, encumbrance, is the weight that so easily entangles you. So he was carrying an anchor, and it was tied to a rope, and he was holding on to the rope, and he ran. And as he's running, he drops the anchor, and as soon as the rope runs out, the anchor line yanks him, and he gets pulled off and knocked off his feet. And then they did it again, where instead of dropping the anchor while he was running, he dropped the anchor, then started running. So it says, lay aside everything that causes you to get entangled. And so they were able to translate and create words to give this picture, that you lay aside whatever prevents you from running the most efficiently. Lay aside every encumbrance and the sin. So it may be external things, it may be things that are going on in our life, stress of our life, mentality, bad thinking, maybe sin. These things can cause us to not run well. And they can hinder us. And they can entangle us. You ever notice when you're doing a little sin, you're entangled and it gets to take over more and more and more of your life? Well, that's what he says. Lay aside all of these things and run the race. And notice he says, run the race with endurance. Some translations translate this as patience. And patience is kind of a steady determination to keep on going on. We're signed up for a marathon, not a sprint. And the word marathon actually comes from the word agony or agonizing. And a marathon is something that is agonizing. And here we are in this Christian faith, the faith of Jesus, our life in faith. And sometimes we feel agonized. We're agonizing because of all of the stress that we have to endure. Sometimes it's external stress. Sometimes it's internal stress. During the first year of COVID, this is funny that we should say it's the first year. We're now approaching the end of the second year. But in the first year, I thought I had a lot of time on my hands. I have a stationary bike at home. I used to ride all the time anyway, but I thought, you know what, I'm going to log my hours, and I'm going to compete with myself. And so I was doing 30, 40, 50-mile days. Yeah, it was no problem. I said, let me do a 60-mile day. I do my 60-mile day. I thought, no problem. So, by the way, it's about 2 hours per 30 miles, just in case you're wondering. So I'd be on the bike, and so then I said, let me try a 65-mile day. And I was going up in 5-mile increments because it was getting a little longer. And so I'm riding on my 65-mile day, And I'm riding, and I get to 50 miles. And I'm huffing, and I'm puffing. My legs are throbbing. And I said, one more hour, I could do it. I said, I'm going to get there, and I just said, yeah, I could do it. I go another 10, 15 minutes. I'm thinking, that was a pretty dumb decision. But I decided I'm going to still do it, and I look up, and I'm at 59 miles, and I'm thinking, 6 more miles. Usually the last 3 or 4 miles are a piece of cake because, it's just kind of like you're out there for the rest of the cruise. Now I had 6 more miles, and I don't know if I had a whole lot left. And I said, I'm not going to look at the time again. I'm not going to look again until I feel like it's come. And I'm riding. I hit my 65 miles, and it was agonizing externally, my body. Sometimes agonizing is internal, where your inner being has nothing to offer. Sometimes our faith is so demanding, we have nothing to offer from within. Jews for Jesus, we travel, and we do what's called our spring tour. We go around the country, and we speak in churches. Years ago, we used to do 3 weeks. Now we're doing 2 weeks. If we go out, we're doing 2 weeks. And so it was about 7 years ago, and I had 23 meetings in 20 days, driving an average of 3 to 4 hours a day. And I'm at the point of 5 meetings left. This was the day of my 6th meeting to 5 left. And I'm doing my Passover presentation, and I'm standing there, and inside I was drained. I was so drained on the inside, this was my prayer. Lord, if I fall over, let me fall backwards and not forwards so I don't crash through the table. That was my prayer. I was exhausted internally. I thought I had given everything, and I just prayed. And God gave me a fresh wind, and not only did I finish that night without falling, I made it to the end of my tour, and it was internally agonizing, though. My soul was just empty. Sometimes we could get like that when we are burnt out. It's very easy to grow weary. And so God tells us here how to run the race without growing weary. The first thing we do is we set aside everything that will prevent us from being our most effective. The second thing we see is in Hebrews 12, verse 2. It says, fixing our eyes on Jesus, the author and perfecter of our faith, who for the joy set before him endured the cross, despising the shame, and sat down at the right hand of the throne of God. So we keep our eyes on Jesus. Why? He's the finish line. He's the finish line. He is where we're aiming to get. You ever look at sometimes in a race in the Olympics, and I've seen this many times, I don't have a specific reference, but a guy is about to win a race, and he hears footsteps coming behind. You know what happens? He turns around and looks, and the guy passes him. You ever see that? Keep your eyes focused on the finish line. Jesus is the finish line. And whether it be because he comes and takes us up, or because we pass from this life and enter into his presence, he is the finish line. The presence of Jesus is our finish line. And that's what we look forward to. That's where we keep our eyes. And when we keep our eyes on Jesus, we have success because he's in charge. And even in the scriptures, we see an explanation and a demonstration that this is true. Think of Peter. You know the story. Peter's on the boat. He sees Jesus walking, and what does he do? Jumps out of the boat and starts walking on the sea. Right? He's doing pretty well. Until when? Took his eyes off Jesus, looked at the waves, started sinking. Keep your eyes on Jesus. He is the finish line. He is the example for us to follow. Not only that, it says he is the author and perfecter of the faith. He is the author in that he is the one who started the faith. In Hebrews chapter 2, verse 10, it tells us, in bringing many sons to glory, to perfect the author of salvation through suffering. He's the one who started it all. And not only is he the author, but the perfecter. He's going to bring it to completion. You can't do it on your own. You need him. Philippians 1, it says, I am confident of this, that he who began the good work in me, what? He will complete it. He will complete it. So he is the author. Salvation comes from him. It originates from him, and he is the perfecter. It ends with him. All he wants us to do is keep our eyes on him, and we will be more likely to have success. Obviously, we have to do a couple things. We have to lay aside the encumbrances, because if we're looking at him and keeping the encumbrances, it's going to be one up and down bumpy road race, if you know what I mean. A lot of jumps and hurdles to jump over. Keep our eyes on him, lay aside the encumbrances, and it can go smoother. And then notice it says, for the joy set before him, he endured the cross. We're going to talk about the cross in a minute, but for the joy set before him. What was the joy? Well, he left glory, he left the presence of the Father, so he's looking forward to go back to the presence of the Father. But in addition, it says that he came down to bring redemption and reconciliation. He endured suffering and the cross so that we can be with him. We are his joy. Did you ever think of that? If you're a child of God, you are the joy of Jesus. You're his joy. You're his delight. He actually came down so that you can be redeemed, forgiven of your sin, and reconciled to the relationship he created to have with you. We are his joy. Did you ever see yourself in that light? You are the joy of Jesus. For the joy set before him, he endured suffering and shame. Then the third thing we see here in Hebrews 12, verses 1, 2, and 3, we see chapter 13. Man, I made these slides, so it's all me. They're bad, but we're in chapter 12. That's what happens when you're in front of the computer so much. You can't see what keys you're pressing anymore. But this is what it says in Hebrews 12:3. It says, for consider him who has endured such hostility by sinners against himself, so that you will not grow weary and lose heart. When it says that he endured the cross, it's not to inform us of how he died. It's to inform us of the nature of how he died. The crucifixion is the most torturous, painful way of death known at that time. And not only was it a painful, excruciatingly painful death, it was spiritually painful, because the Bible tells us that he who knew no sin became sin for us. You see, he took the sin of the world, and in the Gospels, we see how devastating that was for Jesus, because while he had the sins of the world on him, he cries out on the cross, my God, why hast thou forsaken me? You see, for the only time in all of creation, in all of eternity, God the Son is no longer in fellowship with God the Father because he had sin on him. So he's agonizing in pain in the spiritual dimension. And he was nailed to a tree. And he was in spiritual pain, and he endured this. It says, consider this, contemplate on this, think about this, that Jesus was born, Jesus left glory, the hope came down, and he was born just so he can die on that cross. So that through his death and his blood, he can cleanse us and pay for our sin, and so that we would, by receiving it, we would have eternal life. And then notice what it says. See that little word right in the middle of the middle line? So that. That little word there, that's an important word in the Bible. That gives reason. You see? So that you will not grow weary. He died so that we don't have to grow weary. Can you believe that? He died so that we don't have to get tired in the faith. That we don't have to think about throwing in the towel when it gets too difficult for us to think, how am I going to press on in this faith? This faith is taxing my soul. How am I going to press on? He died so we don't even have to think about it. Because if we lay aside the encumbrances, if we keep our eyes focused on Him, and if we remember actively why He died, we don't have to grow weary. We can endure. So here we see this simple formula for how to run the race. Very simple. Very simple. It's actually simple to say, but I'm sure you can agree with me, it's not so simple to do. But here's the formula. 3 steps. Lay aside every encumbrance that hinders you from running the race, whether it be external things you can't let go of or sin that's bogging you down. Set it aside. Take it off. Put it aside. Keep your eyes fixed on Jesus. What He did, who He was, why He did it. Keeping your eyes. If you always are looking at Jesus, you don't have problems. Your problems, you can say to Jesus, and this is what I say. Hey, Jesus, this is your problem. Why don't you take care of it? It's your problem. You got me here. You said you brought me here. You'll bring me out of here. I need you here. I can't do it. It's all yours. Fix your eyes on Jesus and consider actively remembering why He died so that we don't have to become weary. Because we're in a marathon. And when it's going to end, I don't know. But between the time it started and the time it ends, we have hope. And we have a way to have victory. Set aside the stuff that messes us up. Keep our eyes on Him. And remember what He did and why.